Hey there, hey friends, Ken here, your Thrifty Apprentice, and welcome back to another Thrifty Review video. So friends, today we are taking a look at the MaimeriBlue professional line of watercolors. I will walk you through my testing phase, my illustration phase, and then give you my overall thoughts of the particular product. I will let you know that one set was sent to the studio as sponsorship. The other set was purchased by myself, just in case any of that makes any difference to you. Now, I always suggest that whenever you are looking at a product and considering whether to buy it, that you do check out several different reviews so that you can get many different artists' perspectives. Because keep in mind that review videos are done from the perspective of an artist based on the way they use the product in their painting style. Now, with that said, let's just jump in. We have two sets of 12 milliliter tubes, which together gives me 12 milliliter tubes. Now, MaimeriBlue did partner with artists and art influencers in order to release these two sets. So basically, an art influencer was chosen to curate a set of colors from MaimeriBlue's standing line of watercolors, and then those curated colors were put into sets. Now, the two artists that were chosen in order to influence these particular sets were Gina Rainey and Jeannie Dixon, who both have YouTube channels, which you can find. I will be sure to try to remember to link those in the video description so that you can go check out the two influencers that the particular sets were put together, just in case you would like to look a little bit deeper and explore a little bit more their painting styles and the type of art that they produce. So let's just take a look at the packaging. You have MaimeriBlue on the front. It lets you know that there are 6 12 milliliter tubes or 0.41 ounces per tube. There's the Maimeri logo on it. If you flip them up on the side, they both have UPC codes. It lets you know that the paints are manufactured in Italy, and there is an address as well as a website and an email address for basically MaimeriBlue. That's their name there in Italian. On the back of each box, you are going to basically get a little synopsis of both of the influencers that were used to curate both sets. You'll get the social sites for those influencers. You're going to get a list of the colors that's included in the set. So let's just look at these. First, we're going to look at the Jeannie Dixon. Jeannie is a watercolor artist and digital content creator, author of Hello Watercolor, and founder of the popular Instagram account @Jeannie Dixon Designs, where she is mostly known for her modern watercolor techniques and unique lettering style. You can find more of her work and tutorials on her Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube channel. This particular set is going to include yellow vanadium, orange lake, yellow ochre, primary red magenta, turquoise green, and quinacridone violet reddish. And there is the AP seal of approval on each one of the colors to let you know that they do adhere to the non-toxic regulation. On the back of the second set, which is Gina Rainey. Gina Rainey is an illustrator, watercolor artist, surface pattern designer, and born and raised Southern California girl. She has been teaching watercolor, calligraphy, and illustration around the globe for 10 years on her YouTube channel and in her best-selling how-to books, Everyday Watercolor. You can find more of her work and tutorials on her website, Instagram, and YouTube channel. This set will include the colors primary yellow, primary red light, quinacridone red, green gold, Prussian blue, and carbon black. And of course, they all have the AC seal of approval with the exception of green gold and carbon black, which has their own individual warnings. Now, it does let you know that carbon black conforms to the ASTM D4236 regulation, but there is a warning that for cancer causation. Under the green gold, you will see that it may be harmful if swallowed, and then it lets you know the actual makeup, that it contains copper, and that you should keep it away from children. But of course, we always encourage responsible art product use here in the thrifty corner of the art world. So remember, no inhaling, no ingesting of your paints, and you should be perfectly fine, okay? All right, now let's just pop these open right quick and see. Now you will notice that they come in a slide out corrugated box, which of course has the little MaimeriBlue illustrations. And I'm gonna assume these two illustrations were done by the individual influencer that was used to curate this set. In this case, the kind of pinky red green was done by Gina, and the more colorful yellow, purple, blue, red flower composition was done by Dixon. So there we have that. We'll slide the slide out part, which then has a lid which you pull open. The card box is, you know, it's pretty steady. It's a cardboard box that contains tube paints, which is not a big deal at all. It's solid enough to hold your tube paints together without anything, you know, tearing up or falling apart. Now, I've actually reordered all of the tubes inside the sets based on the way that I set them up in the palette. So they're not in the order as you're looking at them, how they came in the package, which is why I was sure to read the color names off on the back. So I pulled all of the colors out and I reordered them so that they would be set up the way my palette is once they're dried down. With that said, let's take a look at the tubes here. So here you have a 12 milliliter tube. It gives you the color stock number on the front. It gives you opacity from the looks of it, MaimeriBlue, the color name, and then it lets you know that it's made in Italy on the front as well. Now, if you rotate the tube to the side, each one of the tubes will contain pigment information, so you're definitely getting all of the relevant artist information with this particular paint. Rotating onto the back, it'll just simply say MaimeriBlue and lets you know that they're considered superior watercolors. Again, 12 milliliters, and then the same information from the back of the box giving you the manufacturing address, phone number, and website for MaimeriBlue is printed on the bottom. And then there is a UPC code. Because these are professional paints, they can be purchased open stock or tube by tube on the art market. They are in an aluminum tube, which is actually really well made. They have screw off plastic tops that have a grip on the top to make it easier for you to grip to screw them off. I didn't have any issues removing or replacing any of the screw off tops. As you can see, there is no foil lid or foil covering the neck of the tube, which is a great indicator that it's not an economical product. It's not a budget product, because you don't get the whole medicine tube style containers that you typically see indicative of your more budget to budget artist grade paints. So all of that seemed pretty cool. I was really just, you know, overall happy, okay with the presentation, more so with the fact that you are getting 12 milliliters per tube, because I do love to purchase the bigger tubes of paints, because I know I'll be able to make several different half pan or full pan sets from them. Now, I am an artist that likes to paint from dried down paints. So of course, the very first thing I did after assessing the packaging was to grab 12 half pans and to squeeze a little bit of each of the colors into each of the half pans to allow it to dry down. And this is where testing the actual paint formula began. I'll start by saying that the consistency of the paint in each tube was pretty standard across all 12 tubes. I didn't experience any hardness or any super liquid formulation. Everything was pretty consistent and they all dried down pretty uniformly. I also mentioned that there was no experience of binder pigment separation in the tube. Although if you were to open a tube of paint and you do have binder and pigment separation, do keep in mind that could be a combination of a lot of different things. One of the main things is that maybe the paint was manufactured a while ago and it's been sitting on the shelf for a while. But I did not experience any of those issues with the consistency of the paint. I was able to fill each one of my half pans about the same amount. It all dried down about the same rate as well. Now there is some water evaporation that happens, and of course the paints do dry down. There is no cracking associated with that dry down, and I'm not sure if you can tell, but most of them stay in this almost semi-moist formula, so to speak. Once they dried down, the two that dried down the hardest would have been the yellow vanadium as well as the yellow ochre, so both being yellow pigments. The rest of them really kept a pretty semi-moist feel and appearance to them, which overall, between the packaging, the consistency of the paints in the tube, the panning of the paints, and the allowance of them to dry down, up until this point, I hadn't experienced any problems with the paints at all. So let's move this over to the side, and we are going to actually just go directly into looking at the swatching sheet. So the very first thing I did after allowing the paints to dry down was to go ahead and swatch the paints out onto a sheet of 100% cotton watercolor paper, So I laid down a black alcohol marker line in order to test opacity, and then I went through and swatched twice. I swatched once in a watery wash, and then I went back after that watery wash was dry in order to do a glazing layer so I could start to test transparency as well as the layering ability of the paints. Now, from the initial swatch, there was no issues. They worked beautifully on the 100% cotton paper. The one thing about the paints that I did notice, based on the color choice that I have, now I'm not sure if this is the case for all of their paints due to the fact that they are a professional paint maker and they do seem to be using tried and true pigments. I would make the assumption that based on the pigment, the color may perform a little differently. However, between the 12 tubes that were included in these two sets, these paints are pretty uniform. There wasn't anything that just stood out to me as being too different as far as texture go. Of course, they seem to be really clean pigments, so there was no flocculation or appearance of like fillers or anything like that from the swatching itself. As you can see, most of the colors turned out to be pretty transparent, with the exception of the yellow vanadium as well as the yellow ochre, which you would kind of expect to be a little bit more opaque because yellows just tend to be more opaque, especially when you're talking about an earth tone yellow like yellow ochre. Now we're going to get into the pigment numbers in just a moment, but before we go through that, I just wanted to kind of guide you guys through the actual paper testing that I did. So once the swatching was done and I'd assessed what I thought maybe the transparency of each of the colors was, I decided to go in and start to do a little color mixing testing. So I wanted to do a cool, a warm, and then a split primary. The thing is, between the 12 tubes, I did not have a warm and a cool version of all of the primaries. Between the 12 tubes, or the two sets, there was a warm and a cool red, a warm and a cool yellow. However, I only experienced cool blues between both sets. One of the sets contained like a turquoise green, which is kind of blue leaning with a green undertone, definitely a cooler color though. And then the other set contained Prussian blue, which is definitely on the cooler spectrum of the blue hue when it comes to that color. So I will say that in this, initially from opening the colors that I purchased, I was missing a warm blue, which is a little bit of a bummer, but it didn't cause too much of an issue. And we're going to get into talking about that when I actually show you guys what I've painted with them. Now, I didn't realize at the time that I called myself doing a split temperature color mixing that actually I did the same one here, so just kind of overlooked that. But you'll see here I used, let's see, we used for the cool, I used a primary red or primary magenta and mixed it with a with the yellow vanadium, which is more like a lemon yellow color, and it gave me a pretty fiery orange, nice tone. That particular mixture has more red than yellow, so I was able to get a pretty nice saturation there. Then I mixed the turquoise green, which would have been the cooler blue in one of those sets, with the yellow vanadium again, which gave me a really beautiful orange. The thing is, the secondary colors came out really nice. And then of course I mixed the primary red or primary magenta, they call it primary red magenta, with the turquoise green, and it gave me a really nice saturated sort of cooler leaning purple there. So it was a beautiful mixtures, very clean. Again, no grittiness, no flocculation, no sign of fillers, even once I started to mix the colors together. And you will notice that every single one of the 12 colors were single pigment colors, which was absolutely amazing. It gave me really good hope from the very beginning that the colors were going to be transparent and clean, and they were. I did not experience any issues with that. Next, I mixed the quinacridone red, which is the warmer red of the 12, with the primary yellow. Nope. Why did I use that? Well, I should have mixed it with the primary yellow. Actually, I did mix it with the primary yellow. That yellow is definitely more golden than this one. I just wrote the wrong thing there. So this should be PY97 instead of PY184. Not a big deal to correct. So I mixed the primary yellow with the quinacridone red. Really desaturated, muted orange, but an orange nonetheless. Then I mixed the Prussian blue with the primary yellow, which gave me a really nice earthy, cool leaning green, which could be used in so many different landscape type of paintings. And then of course I mixed the primary red with the Prussian blue in order to get a really beautiful, deep saturated purple. Now I did use more red in that than blue, so it does have more of a reddish undertone, but nonetheless, gorgeous colors. And this one ended up being the exact same mixing wheel, so we won't have to go through this. The next thing I did was to try the paints out with a salt wash. And as you can see, they reacted really well to salt. I love the texture that the salt was able to give the paints. And this is actually just using regular table salt. This is not sea salt or any specialized type salt. I pulled that directly out the kitchen and it worked wonderfully with the paints. Of course, there's a few little loose roses here just so I could start to see how the paints might blend and merge together before I got into doing any illustrations with them. Now, this particular testing paper is Grumbacher 140-pound cold pressed paper, but it's a 100% cellulose paper. There's no cotton content to it at all. And I have started to do a lot of my testing as well as swatching on cellulose paper. Because of the size and because of those stamp textures, it normally shows you when a paint may have a problem like flocculation. And you can definitely see the difference between flocculation, which is also known as like grittiness, and kind of a sandy texture, from granulation, which is a completely different look. And I feel like cellulose paper helps me see those things a little bit better, which is why I tend to do my testing and swatching on cellulose paper. As I said, they blended okay on the cellulose paper. I'm not going to say that you can't get away with a wonderful looking composition using a cellulose. Just keep in mind that it is a cellulose paper, right? So the next thing I did was to lay down some colors and sort of a blending line here, allowing them to kind of run into each other. So just so I could see how they would start to mix on the paper and whether or not they would create mud, which I didn't get any mud from those mixtures lining the colors up. And this was done in order to do a lift test, which I typically do on camera with you guys always when I don't forget. So I'm going to grab a flat synthetic golden Teclon brush and we're going to get it wet with some water here, scrape off the excess, and then I'm going to go in and go straight down the middle using pretty nice pressure there. Then with a paper towel, I will blot that line so we can see that it does definitely lift, even in the range of those colors like the red and the oranges, which would typically stain. Just keep in mind that lifting does depend on many different things, including the sizing in your paper. But for the most part, you are able to lift. You would definitely be able to get back to mostly the white of the paper in order to do highlights, lift out highlights if you needed to, or if you needed to lift a mistake out while you were painting, you definitely could lift it out in order to continue to paint. So overall, for the preliminary testing, there was no issues with the paint. But of course, testing in this form, in my opinion, will only tell you so much about a paint. It won't really let you know how the paints perform until you actually use them. But before I decided to use them in the illustrations, I really wanted to get myself familiar with the pigments. Now, this next section that we're moving into might not be for everybody, but there are going to be some people out there that are concerned with pigment numbers, that are concerned with light fastness, because they do use their paints in order to do commission work that they sell, things that are going to be hung on display, either in the house, in a museum, in another public place. So knowing pigment information and whether or not a pigment will stand up to being exposed to light of any kind is something that's relevant. If it's not relevant for you, please feel free to skip ahead to the very next portion where I won't be talking about pigment numbers. But while we're on this swatching, let's just kind of look at this and talk about the pigments that are included in this set. Now, I did again put my palette in order: rainbow color, red, yellows, greens, blues, into my earth tones. And then it's also done from the coolest to the warmest color in each color family. So I started out with primary red or primary magenta, PV19. Now PV19 is commonly has the color name Quin Violet, Quinacridone Rose. MaimeriBlue just happens to call theirs primary red magenta. And I think of all of the reds that's in the set, it would probably be the most primary in my opinion. Now, this one, PV19 carries excellent light fast ratings, so you shouldn't have any issues with that particular color. Next up was Quinacridone Rose, PR209. This is typically called just like Quin Red, which it is here. And it has PR209, again, has excellent light fast ratings on the. Next we have Permanent Red Light, which is PR168. I've seen it called several different things: Perling Scarlet, some form of a scarlet. PR168 actually only has about good to fair light fast ratings. It's not as strong of a pigment or as light fast of a pigment as say your PR209 or your PV19, yet it still is not a fugitive color. Next up we had Orange Lake, which was PO43. Not a pigment that I was familiar with at all. I actually had to look this one up. It did seem to have very good to excellent light fast ratings when it came to the overall color, but of course it had no A rating when it came to watercolors. And I point that out specifically because water dilutes the light fastness of a pigment, which is why I'm typically looking for the light fast ratings of a color specifically when it comes to watercolor versus what the overall rating of that pigment may be. So this one I'm not really sure about, with it having no light fast rating or testing done to it in the watercolor realm per se, according to handprint.com anyway, which is where all of my pigment information, research, and study normally comes from. Next, there was Primary Yellow, PY97. This is your Handsome family. PY97 you normally see is like Handsome Medium. I think it's Handsome Medium and Daniel Smith, if I'm not mistaken, which has a very good light fast rating to it. Then there is PY184, your Yellow Vanadium, which I've never heard it called vanadium before, but this is like your yellow ochre family of color. Not yellow ochre, I'm sorry. Lemon yellow family of color. PY184, if I'm not mistaken, with Daniel Smith is the bismuth yellow, which I think I have that in my Daniel Smith paint palette. And it has an excellent light fast rating for PY184. So just on the top row alone, outside of the Orange Lake, which didn't say it was fugitive, all of the pigments are pretty stable and trustworthy. On the bottom row, we started out with turquoise green. Now, PB16 is a phthalo green pigment number, or basically phthalo turquoise. It is literally the pigment number for phthalo turquoise, and they just happen to be calling theirs turquoise green. PB16 has good to excellent light fast rating, so there's nothing to worry about there. The next one is Prussian blue. PB27 is the pigment number for Prussian blue specifically. Now, Prussian blue actually has an excellent light fast ratings, but I always like to throw out the warning that Prussian blue can be problematic. It is known to sort of shift when exposed to a lot of light, and then turn back to its natural color once it's not exposed to as much light. Or so it happens to be one of my favorite colors, regardless of what people say about it. I love to use it in many different mixtures and many different paintings, but it is important to know these type of things, again, especially if you're going to be doing commission-based work. Next, we had quinacridone violet reddish, which is PV55. PV55 is the pigment number for quinacridone purple. It has excellent light fast ratings, so I wasn't worried about that one. Then we moved into what I put into the earth tone section for this palette, although one might question me putting green, gold, and earth tones, but I digress. Next up was yellow ochre PY42, which is the standard pigment number for yellow ochre. It has an excellent light fast ratings, and you normally see yellow ochre PY42 or some synthetic version, maybe PY43, in almost any paint set you pick up. Next, I have green gold, which is PY129, which is the actual pigment number for green gold. I've tried green gold in many different sets. Daniel Smith, I've tried green gold in Magello Mission Gold Pure Pigment. I've tried green gold and a couple other sets. It happens to be one of my favorite colors. I will say that this is one of the better ones that I've tried. Really clean and really transparent, beautiful yellow undertone to it. And again, excellent light fast ratings. And then we wrap this palette up with PBK7. They're calling it carbon black. I normally see PBK7 referred to as lamp black, but either way, PBK7 itself has excellent light fast ratings. So I would have to say that I do not see any of these pigments or these colors being problematic. So whether you bought both sets or whether you just purchased one of the sets, they both are going to contain light fast colors that's got pretty strong light fast ratings to them. And I just thought that was something that I should kind of cover for those people who are wondering about the pigment makeup and whether or not the paints would actually be light fast. Okay, so now let's just kind of move on and explore some things that I've actually painted with them, so we can just talk about the painting experience a little more. And when I originally started to test these paints, it was actually back before September, maybe like the end of August. But September moved into the Thrifty Cheap Art Challenge. So I didn't get a chance to really get the review together in the month of September. And as October started to go by, I'm like, okay, I really need to get this review out. So excuse me, we can go ahead and look at some other watercolor products. So let's just look at some of the things that I've done with the paints. Here, the very first thing we did, and most of this you may be able to find on the channel. If I can remember to go back and find these and link them, I will do that so that you guys can refer back to them. But the very first thing that we painted with the paints was this sort of quarter view of a Cosmo. I love Cosmos. We did it with on Grumbacher 140-pound cold pressed paper. So this is a student grade or artist grade cellulose paper, just in case you're wondering. Was able to get some beautiful details. The colors blended really well, but there was a shift. There was much more of a shift in the color on the cellulose paper than there is on the watercolor paper. I mean, on the 100% cotton paper, I'm sorry. But that's more on the paper and not the paints. You just have to keep that in mind. You can have the most vibrant, bright, and beautiful paints under the sun. And if you have a cellulose paper, it is going to cost them to shift a little bit. With that said, I still think that this turned out really nice. I was able to get a flat wash in the background without any issues. As I said earlier, the colors on my petals blended beautifully. I was able to get detailed with using the paints and a little bit more of a skim milk to milky consistency versus the wet and the wet blending that I was doing on each of the petals. And we were also able to illustrate water droplets on the petals using those the same paints and a little bit of gel pen. This was actually a lot of fun for me. Like I said, I'm going to try to remember to link it. I hope you guys go back and give this a try, regardless of whatever type of paints or paper you do it on. This is just an overall fun illustration, and it was a great way to kind of be introduced to the overall painting process with this particular set, and it got me excited, especially to see that I could produce something like this on a 100% cellulose paper. Next thing that was done with the paints was illustration for the cheap art challenge. I forget what day this was. As you can see, I still haven't filled out the journaling spot. I'm going to get around to it. I just have so much going on. But this was done on a 100% cotton watercolor paper. This is actually done on the watercolor paper that I chose to bound the Defyantarts sketchbooks with. So if you are to get any of the future Defyantarts sketchbooks that are 100% cotton, this will be the paper that is in those books. Now, this is Artist Loft. But the 100% cotton paper was cut down to 5x7 and then glued onto the Artist Loft paper. With that said, beautiful saturation. Again, able to get details with using less water in the paints. They held their colors really well. As you can see, there's a huge difference in the shift done on a cellulose paper versus the shift done on a 100% cotton paper. Definitely get more saturation held in your illustration from a cotton paper than you will from a cellulose paper. However, both of them I feel like turned out really well. I was able to get a lot of little detail in here. I love, again, the way the colors blend. And that green gold is an absolutely amazing base color to mix so many different variations of green from, without having to use your primaries to mix the green, which I found super helpful. And I'll also add that the turquoise green, which is more of a blue color with a green undertone, was also a really beautiful color for mixing different shades of blue and green. I don't really have any complaints or issues about the way the paints performed. I wasn't completely impressed with my performance on this one, but the paints held up. They blended beautifully. I was able to lift when I needed to lift with no issues, although I was using a 100% cotton watercolor paper that might not be as heavily sized as this cellulose paper was, but I still experienced absolutely no problems with lifting. The mixed media ability was wonderful. I was able to layer on gouache or white gel pen whenever I needed to without having any issues with it actually adhering to the paint or disturbing the paint itself. So I really enjoyed this one as well. Now, next we ended up doing October 25's calendar. And this is done in a pre-recorded release that's on the channel where we painted a fall landscape. Again, I'm going to try to remember to link these, whatever has videos anyway, that are on YouTube. And I really enjoyed this painting. Now, this is done on 100% cotton, rough press, bohong professional paper. And it held the saturations of the color so well. I don't think I experienced any shift from wet to dry. I mean, of course there was, but the naked eye is so hard to pick up on. And of course, because I was doing a landscape, using that rough press paper helped to make the landscape look more landscape-ish and more realistic-ish. I just really love doing landscapes on rough press paper. If you've never tried it, I definitely suggest that you give it a try. You may be pleasantly surprised with the results you're going to get, and I feel like it just helps to make it easier to paint a landscape. But that's my opinion. As I said, I thoroughly enjoyed this. It was so much fun. I would actually repaint this illustration. I had so much fun doing it. The paints layered beautifully. I was able to get softer saturated colors to kind of have this receding effect to the back mountain. I was able to get really stark, bright, warmer colors to warm up the front mountain and bring it closer to us. I was able to use different variations of neutrals mixed with the regular colors in order to get different variations of shades, which made it really easy for me to make it appear as if though the tree and the bush line here is closer to us, because it would be more in shadow, making it appear like there's more light in the back. And it also helped with the time of day. Overall, I had fun with this one, and it's probably the one I enjoyed painting the most, or almost the one I enjoyed painting the most anyway. This one does have a video, and I'll be trying to remember to link it. Now, as I told you guys, I've tested these paints over a month now, so there's much more than the normal just 3 illustrations that I'll typically do with the paint before moving on. Next thing I did with the paints was to try to do a structured, loose illustration. I've been trying my best to work on loosening up because all of my paintings seem to be kind of tight and detailed, and whenever I try to loosen up, it never seems to turn out right. But I was sent this sketchbook basically to just kind of try the paper out in it, along with some pens and things like that. So I did a kind of loose wallpaper background style illustration where I used the paints to basically paint the flowers first, and then I went in with some of the black pens and the black fine liner pens and white gel pen that was sent along with this paper for testing in order to kind of complete the illustration. And I wanted it to have this sort of stylized background pattern paper feel to it, and for the style I was going for, I feel like I achieved it. I feel like the paints worked beautifully on this paper. Once again, they held their saturation without a huge shift. I didn't have to do any lifting in this illustration, but this one was more so a testament to how well the paints will work in mixed media, because you have watercolors, you have inks, you have gel pen ink, you have, those 3 things in this. And this is a 100% cotton paper as well. So, you know, although they'll work okay on cellulose paper, you know, when at all possible, I will always encourage people to create or illustrate on a 100% cotton paper. And then to wrap everything, there is a video that came out this past Wednesday on the channel where I used the paints in order to pull a prompt from this current Inktober. Inktober is an art challenge that runs throughout the month of October every year. Inktober 2025 is going really strong. I said I wasn't going to participate in it, but both of these illustrations turned out to be Inktober illustrations. Actually, I have 3 illustrations that turned out to be Inktober illustrations, but we'll talk about that in another video. Here, I was doing a line and wash daffodil, where I took an illustration, was drawn from the drawn out illustration, showed you how to use fine liners and waterproof pens in order to ink it before adding your watercolor wash in order to turn the composition into a line and wash. Now, this one is another one that I really enjoyed. Just the overall creation process, because I'll be honest, friends, up until the point that I did this one, I tried a couple of illustrations and they didn't turn out well. And then I tackled this, and I feel like for all purposes, it turned out well. It definitely represents and portray what I wanted it to portray, but more so, I got a chance to really test the paints out a final time before deciding to shoot this review. I tend to have a hard time working with yellows. That wasn't the case in this illustration. The yellows in the sets are so bright and vibrant and pure and semi-transparent that I just had so much fun layering and blending them together. Most of the color blending done here was done on the paper. That was the case for most of the illustrations. I really wanted to see how they would blend from being, if you just kind of threw them into a wet wash on the paper, in comparison to like blending the color or mixing the color on the palette and then transferring it to your illustration paper. Know that both methods worked without any issues. didn't get mud unless I intended to mix mud, and at that point I was calling it a neutral. Everything was clean. Everything was transparent to semi-transparent, with the exception of the yellow ochre, which should have been a little bit more opaque than any of the other colors included. So friends, I have to say overall, I didn't really experience many issues with these paints. If I had to name a con about the overall experience, it would be that I was working with 2 curated sets. And because I was working with 2 curated sets, it was a little harder to get the colors that I would typically use to set up a palette. But one of the wonderful things about working with a curated set is that it'll force you into using colors that you may not typically use, which is going to help you grow as an artist. And I really enjoy coming outside of my normal color palette bubble in order to try something put together by another artist that I feel still worked really well. And although there is no warm blue between either sets, which is the one major thing that I would change, but I didn't curate these sets, so who asked me, right? Who asked me? So yeah, that would be the only con I would say, is that I wish that there had been an ultramarine blue. Now, I did decide to augment the set doing some of the paintings, and it was for like the last painting. It wasn't this one. I pulled the extra colors out of this one. I think it was it was the fall landscape. When doing the fall landscape, I did put down the middle a burnt umber or burnt sienna, and I added an ultramarine blue. Now the thing is, these are Cotman artists or student grade watercolors that I added to the palette along with those professional watercolors, which lets you know that they play well with other watercolors, even if those other watercolors are not on the same level as they are. Didn't get any mud, still got really clean mixtures with everything that I was accomplishing here. So overall, outside of no ultramarine or no warm blue, basically, I feel like I don't have any complaints about the sets at all. Now, one last thing I'll show you guys before I jump into talking about price. After panning up the 12 colors, let me just pull these extras out. After panning up the 12 colors, I did pan them up inside a leftover Paul Rubens tin. But what I wanted to show you is that I allowed the paints to dry down on a palette so that I can show you guys this in a review. You'll see that there was no beading of the paints on the metal tin. There's no flocculation. There's no chalkiness in the paints. These are definitely a high quality professional paint, even more so because they're single pigment. And I was pretty impressed. I was pretty impressed with just the overall paint formulation, the way they blended, the way they layered, the way they lifted, the fact that they're transparent to semi-transparent, and the fact that I don't feel like they made it complicated for me to paint in or illustrate at all in any shape, form, or fashion. Now, let's talk price. Here we have 2 different sets. As I said, one was gifted to me, one I purchased. I can't remember which is which. But let's start off with the 6-tube 12 milliliter Gino Rainey set. This particular curated set is currently running on Amazon for $34.50. Okay. The other set, which is the Jeannie Dixon set, 6 tubes, 12 milliliters apiece, is currently on Amazon for $34.52. So there's only a 2-cent difference between the sets. So basically, you can get either set for $34.50. Putting each tube of 12 milliliter paint at the price point of about $5.75 a tube, which in my opinion, just based on the experience, the formulation, and the things that I painted with this, I would say it's worth it. I would definitely spend between $5 and $6 per tube for a 12 milliliter tube of this paint, without a doubt. As a matter of fact, I think I may go back and order a ultramarine blue, a Payne's gray, maybe an indigo if they have one as a part of their lineup, definitely a burnt sienna, definitely a burnt umber, possibly a raw sienna. So there are other colors that I would definitely purchase open stock to add to this set to augment it and make it more along the way I would set up a palette for my painting style. But either or, whether you got either set, you could paint many different illustrations from it because all of the colors are single pigment. They're definitely worth the $5.75 per tube. So friends, if I had to give these paints a rating on a professional star scale of 1 to 5, these paints would fall in at a 4.5 for me. The only reason these paints aren't getting a 5 is because neither set had a warm blue, and that's my preference, to have a warm blue. I would prefer a warm blue in a set over a cool blue. But that's just me. That's me. Everybody's going to be different. So you'll definitely have to take the information that you've heard in this video and use it to make the best decision for yourself as to whether or not the MaimeriBlue paint line is something that would fit your style of painting and whether it's something that you would want to add to your artistic collection. So there you have it, friends. Not too long of a review, I hope, but I do believe I covered everything that I would want to relay about the paints. Of course, as I said earlier in the video, I definitely encourage you to go out there and check out other reviews by other artists you may trust or who may have a painting style that's similar to yours to see what their opinions on the paints may have been. But again, I give them a 4.5. I definitely think they're worth the money, and I do not believe that you would be going wrong with them. Hands down, I would recommend them. Would they be the very first set I reach for to paint? Just depending on what I'm painting and whether or not the pigment makeup of what I'm painting is important at the point. But definitely they would be in the contending. They would be a set I would say you won't be disappointed if you decide to buy them and give them a try. So there you have it, friends. Hopefully some of this information helped you out in some shape, form, or fashion. If you heard, picked up on, saw anything that you like, don't forget to give the video a thumbs up, sprinkle a little love. You can even share the video. Both thumbs up and sharing is going to help push this video in front of other wonderful viewers like yourself. We're almost at the 3,000 subscriber mark, and we're pushing to grow this community, friends, and it's only going to happen with help from beautiful, wonderful, artistic souls like yours. So definitely feel free to share, and don't forget to give a thumbs up. Jump in the comments section. Let me know what you thought of today's review. Do you have any questions? I'll be happy to answer whatever I can. And if I don't know it, I'll go find the answer for you if I possibly can. Let me know whether you've used this line of professional watercolors. And if you have, what do you think of them in comparison to other watercolor lines that you've used? I'd really like to know and get a conversation going, because maybe there are some artists out there that have questions, and we're an all-inclusive community. I cannot stress that enough. Cannot stress that part enough. All right, friends, if you're new to the channel or you're returning and you haven't subscribed, please consider subscribing. Hit that notification bell so that you know when we go live, when we upload. Monday mornings at 11 a.m. Central Standard Time. We normally have our regularly scheduled Monday morning live. There's normally a pre-recorded video release every Wednesday morning at 10 a.m. And whenever we have them, as in the release of this video on Fridays at 10 a.m. when it comes down to product reviews. So definitely hit that notification bell so that you don't miss anything. The video description is going to have all of the relevant links, starting with the Defyantarts website, which I really heavily encourage people to go check out, go through, see what's over there, from the recommended video from the month to the beginning watercolor videos to the beginning sketchbook videos, including the newly edited and added artist product reference list. So if you're looking for a product, if I've tested and reviewed it and recommended, is going to be in the most recommended product list, which you can either access from the link in this video description or by going to the Defyantarts website and scrolling down to the blog section. Social site links are in the video description. Palm Street, which we have our October Palm Street sale coming up really soon. So anybody interested, you guys don't want to miss that. I think you're really gonna like the Defiant Art October art box. So be sure to go over there and hit that notification bell for that. Friends, and Patreon, the Thrifty Apprentice art community has the Creation Station level of Patreon, which is its paid level. There's also a free level, which has access to certain things as well. But if you're a member of the Creation Station, you really get access to all the perks, behind the scenes, real-time tutorials, lives, so much. So definitely go check it out. Traceables, premium giveaways. So check it out, see if it's something that you would be interested in, and if so, then join us over in the Thrifty Patreon community. All right, friends, that's that. Hopefully, like I said, you enjoyed this video, and remember, as I tell you at the end of every single video, just keep creating, friends.